Welcome to the SmartTechCheck podcast, hosted by Mark Vina, your home for candid, insightful, and provocative conversations about the smart home automation, security, smartphones, PC and console gaming, and much more.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Vina, host of the SmartTechCheck podcast. Today is Friday, January 13th, 2023, first podcast of the year. Joining me for today's podcast are Stewart Wolpin, who scribes for Popular Mechanics, AARP, Techlicious, Investopedia, and other terrific publications. John Quain, who writes for the New York Times, Smart Cities, and Tom's Guide. And good old Rob Pegoraro. We're going to make a few jokes about his appearance at CES in a few moments. He doesn't know about this, but it's going to happen. Who writes frequently on tech policy for Wirecutter, PC Magazine, and USA Today. Folks, how are each of you doing today, and how have you all survived? Stuart, you didn't go to CES, but have you all survived getting back from CES?
Barely.
Rob, I'll start with you. Rob.
Yeah.
Good. Came back with a bit of a cold, which is actually industry standard. Not COVID. Have tested negative twice, in case anybody was asking. It was good. It was exhausting. It was tiring. My feet hurt worse than I expected, which I guess is a sign of my advancing age and obsolescence.
And John, did you survive?
I did.
You're in the country, so things must be okay.
Yeah, I finished it off with a ride in a 1968 Eldorado Cadillac convertible to the airport. That to get my last demo, they picked me up at the hotel and drove me to the airport in the car. But this it was for HoloRide, which is a VR that you can attach to any vehicle, and it can kind of prevent motion sickness. But this Cadillac had no seat belts. I forgot. So it was a weird experience going to the airport like that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And Stuart, you were very lucky. You didn't get a chance to go, which I don't really... Actually,
I don't know how lucky it was. I had a severe case of FOMO. I mean, I was glad to save the money. I was glad to save the wear and tear because, like Rob, age is not making this any easier, especially since you have to be on your feet 16, 18 hours a day just to break even on the expenses. Right. But I still suffered. John and I were on the phone on a Zoom call with a couple of other of our Techlicious compatriots, compiling our best of show stuff. And I could see the background of the hall that they were in. It was all very familiar. And I don't say homesickness necessarily, but I certainly miss being there.
Yeah, it's true. We were on that.
You too, man.
Yeah.
They got a decent crowd. They got 150,000 people. I'm always a bit wary of the numbers, by the way, because, it's in, of course, the show's best interest to show a big number. And so the 115,000 might be a bit of a rounded up number, but it felt, I don't know, I'd like to get John and Rob in your opinion. It kind of felt like porridge. Wasn't too cold, wasn't too hot, felt kind of right. My metric, completely unscientific, was how long would it take for me to get an Uber ride, and consistently Uber rides were less than 6 or 7 minutes. I mean, they would hit traffic, of course, when they get into the strip, but getting an Uber wasn't too bad, and from what I understand, getting into restaurants weren't too bad. But Rob, what was your gauge? Do you think that did you like the what you saw from an attendance standpoint, or do you think it was?
So it was interesting. 115,000 seems like a lot, and in the context of most other events that we go to, it is a lot. In CES terms, the last time it was that low, I looked it up. The audited attendance for 2009, when the recession poleaxed a bunch of companies who just didn't show up. They paid for their space, but they said, keep the money, we're not sending anybody there. And that seemed much emptier than I remember this year's one being. Maybe it was just because they didn't use the South Hall of the Las Vegas Convention Center at all. Otherwise, yes, it seemed as busy as ever. You're right, getting around was a little more efficient. Like, I was sure the Vegas Loop, the Teslas in a tunnel thing, to get you from one end of the LVCC to another would be just break down under traffic. Nope. It was efficient as it was last year.
That's one thing I wanted to do. And I just
you should have. Pretty cool.
I've been told it's pretty cool. And very, very quick, too. It's not like it's a 20-minute ride. It's apparently very, very quick. I understand.
It's not particularly cool. It's kind of really old school. Like, it's super old school, right? In a way. And all the fun I made of it,
you won't like it.
You're right. Like all the fun I made about this stupid thing because it doesn't really go anywhere and stuff. I used it. I counted 7 times at Las Vegas because it zipped you from, as Rob said, from the central hall basically over to the west hall, this new hall to the other end of it. So it was really quite a distance. But it's just a Tesla driving in a really small tube. Like it looks like the size of.
It's a human-driven Tesla. Let's point out, no full self-driving to chance your life with.
No maglev, nothing like that.
Yeah.
It's like these humans pull in, and it was fine, but it was also free. We must point out the reason we were using it was because it was free. So it was and uncrowded.
Free
but
wins.
It's weird.
Free wins.
Yeah. It's still weird.
Let's jump into the topics itself from a technology and product standpoint. Yeah. I'll start up with kind of things that jumped out at me is that very broadly, obviously EVs were huge. Lots of interesting demonstrations and new car concepts out there. I think an underlying theme, and I'm sure John will comment on this, but it was interesting. A lot of ingredient companies out there with technologies that were specifically focused on optimizing battery technology in EVs. Because for those who don't know, and obviously all of us know this, is that the modern day EV consists of hundreds of subsystems, and very often those subsystems are not made by the same manufacturer. They're working independently. They perform some type of critical function. Yet anybody who knows anything about optimization, if you don't have an architecture that kind of sort of, makes like a conductor in a symphony, make sure that everything is working in an efficient manner, because all of those subsystems don't have to be active all the time. And if you can make some of them sleep or be more efficient, you can really impact overall energy efficiency. Infineon is one, and a company. They're really focused on that category, and they were demoing some interesting capabilities in that area. I didn't see, the thing that was kind of disappointing. I think Stewart, you'll probably chime in this, is that while Matter was all over the place from a signage standpoint, I didn't see a lot of product demos. There were some demos out there, but they were few and far between. And just to layer on top of that, I was in Best Buy yesterday. And nobody in their smart home section knew what the hell Matter was. So that's a little bit of a disappointment. So Matter still was kind of a no-show in my view. I guess the only other thing, AMD made a lot of noise with their new processor announcement that competes very effectively with small nanometer solutions that will make it rival with Apple Silicon. That was kind of, I think, interesting news. And that, I'll say this over and over again. If you had told me 10 years ago, AMD and Intel would have flipped their positions in terms of relevance, frankly, in the marketplace with interesting technology, I would never have guessed it. But Lisa Su at AMD has done a remarkable job. So at a high level, those were the 3 biggies that I saw. John, what did you see?
There was some of that, subsystems. Panasonic is another company trying to make EVs, more efficient in terms of the subsystems you're talking about using power. One trend I noticed is, how we all get these, where you were 5 years ago kind of things. And I realized that 5 years ago at CES, I was in autonomous vehicles almost day and night there. I was driving around the city with nobody in the front seat. That was happening a lot. This time, not a single one. Right? Not a single autonomous vehicle like that driving around. I think Motion had some, but they didn't respond to queries. Most of these companies didn't respond to queries. It's just kind of not there right now. There was a lot of interesting EV stuff, and a lot of technology that should be in autonomous vehicles. So I did take a lot of rides around in that, but not a lot of that. In the TV area, we still don't have micro LEDs, which is the next technology that we're all kind of waiting to see. It's there, but it's not in any kind of form that any of us can afford or make practical for someone's living room. What I did like in that area that I wanted to mention, because it sounded, again, like a silly idea, but then when I saw it, I thought, it's actually pretty good, was wireless TV, LG's wireless TV. They call it Zero Connect, and what they basically mean by one plug, it needs power. But everything else that's connected to your TV goes wirelessly from a box that you can put anywhere in your living room. So that really made a lot of sense when you start to see how big these TVs are and trying to hang it on a wall or install it somewhere. This made it a lot more practical and easier to do. Unfortunately, it's a proprietary technology. It's not something they're going to put as a standard or something, but that was pretty interesting. And the other trend was all the healthcare stuff. They're really getting, I don't want to say invasive, but it started with, measuring your heart rate and things like that and tracking that and how many steps you did. And now we're up to daily urine tests at home via a wireless.
I saw that demo.
and that wasn't just one company. There are at least 3 companies doing this. And they're like wireless thing you put in your toilet and it automatically tests your urine every day for, a month or 2, up to 3 months before you have to replace it. Don't really want to replace that device, just saying. But that's, now we're getting into a lot of personal data, right? So it's interesting to see how extensive that stuff is, really how much the healthcare area is really advanced too. So I think we're just going to see more and more of these kind of at-home diagnostic devices.
Before we flip over to Rob, what's interesting is that Synaptics, a company that I worked with years ago, to support what you said about wireless connectivity, they have a lot of interesting they're an ingredient company, and they've got a lot of interesting technologies enabling wireless docks, and by extension that you could you could enable wireless TVs as well. But if you look at my setup right now, I've got a great Anchor dock. I've got wires. It works great. I love it. I couldn't live without it. But it looks like an octopus of cables behind my laptop. And one day we're going to get to the point where you have one cord, and that's the power cord, and everything else will be wireless. And hopefully that's the promise. But Rob, when I saw you for the first time, you were I'll put air quotes right. You were interviewing Paula Abdul, and unfortunately I wasn't quick on the draw to get my camera and get some pictures of you and Paula. But which certainly would have been posted on Facebook and Twitter, but I didn't do that.
No doubt.
I'm pleased to say she looked surprisingly spry for someone who's not pitching. I think she's pitching virtual glasses, if I'm not mistaken, smart glasses.
Bluetooth audio smart glasses, which is actually, so I'll talk about that first. Yes, Ms. Abdul was at CES to show off her line of fashion smart glasses, which basically think a Bluetooth hands-free kit without the dork factor. So speakers here, there's 2 microphones, and other people have done this. Like Amazon has had its own line of glasses. There was another company at the exact same reception doing a similar thing. Obviously, I was not expecting to run into 80s pop stars, although after this many years at CES, I probably should have. You never know who you're going to run into. But that's not the trend I'm going to talk about. I am going to mention sustainability, which, as I just wrote about for Fast Company, there was a lot of attention to this. It was really interesting to see at Samsung's press conference and at LG's how much time they spent talking about things like driving down power consumption, using recycled materials, companies that are bringing out products just to do things like properly electrifying your house. Schneider Electric has basically a smart electric panel that you could put in to replace your dumb one, your feature panel, that will let you track the energy consumption of all the appliances in your house. You can add on to it. It's sort of like a Lego, I guess. You can add on smart outlets, a whole home battery, an electric car charger. Lots of stuff going on. And, of course, the Inflation Reduction Act is going to bring a bunch of tax credits to help support these upgrades. Obviously, all the renewable energy solutions being thrown around, the electric cars. Stellantis, the company behind Dodge and Chrysler, they used an entire keynote to basically say, we're not as far behind as we look, because they are horribly far behind everybody else. Here's this great concept Dodge Ram truck, which will be on the road, I think, in 2025. We're putting all this money into building these battery plants, 5 of them around the world. It was a much different focus from past CESs, and I guess that's why they don't call it the Consumer Electronics Show. It's just CES, and you can have the C, the E, and the S stand for whatever you'd like.
Yeah, the Schneider Electric stuff was very, very interesting. And I'm in the process of writing a piece right now that talks a little bit about the disappointment that I saw from a smart appliances standpoint. And I won't get into it here, but I think what Schneider is doing is very interesting because, in a sense, you're storing all this power if you've got solar panels and these batteries that you can put in your unit. And who doesn't like free power? Free power can really do a nice job of kind of offsetting whatever costs you require from your main utility company. But as I'll explain in this article, I still think they've got a long way to go in terms of not Schneider specifically, but the industry, in terms of changing consumer behavior. And from an appliance standpoint, I still don't see that yet. Appliances are great. Hey, I know that my LG refrigerator, I opened up the door 35 times last week, but it's not necessarily telling me with my smart dishwasher, hey, if you wait 3 or 4 hours to wash your dishes, you'll save $1.50. To me, that's real progress because it's changing your behavior, but that's neither here nor there. Stuart, you were the online guy. What did you kind of see that jumped out?
Well, a couple of comments on what I've heard already. On the Matter side, I think a lot of what was going on with Matter was behind the scenes, more or less, because a lot of these companies are still developing their products. The CSA people are still developing their marketing materials. So the fact that you went to stores and salespeople at the Home Depot didn't know what you were talking about, I'm not surprised by that because the big rollout hasn't really happened yet. My guess is we'll probably see that in next month or in March. Or even April, which is much more of a home improvement season for these people. And you'll see, I think, a lot of people doing everything at the same time, and it'll be a much more visible market push probably in the early spring. On John's Digital Health, I saw a lot I did not see, but heard about getting emails from a lot of these digital health, but it's not only on the diagnostic side. I think it's important to understand that a lot of these companies are trying to coordinate with health facilities and doctors and create not only a system of diagnostics, but monitoring. And monitoring, I think, was a big theme in the digital health stuff that I saw, so people can recover at home, save hospital room costs, and make sure that they're getting the care they need without the expense, essentially. So I think a lot of what these companies are doing are not only diagnostics, but monitoring for ongoing care. There was a lot of things for hypertension, and that was all tied in with EKG and blood pressure and blood oxygen. So there's a lot of, I think, at-home monitoring stuff going on in digital health. Again, a little bit under the radar because, again, a lot of this is behind the scenes. One of the other themes that I thought I saw, at least that CTA itself was pushing, was AR, VR, and the Metaverse. And again, I think a lot of this is back room kind of stuff because I think a lot of corporations are investing in Metaverse kind of technologies. How they'll manifest itself in the real world is probably not on the consumer side or consumer device side necessarily. But Sony took time out from their usual hawking of the creative stuff to talk about the Sony PlayStation VR 2 headset. HTC made a big deal of Vive. TCL made a big deal about their new VR headset that's going to have external cameras so you can switch between virtual reality and the real world. And obviously, during the course of the show or right after, all the rumors started flying, which we'll talk about in a minute, that Apple is going to come out with their AR, VR device sooner than expected. Now, whether or not any of this actually ends up taking hold in the consumer marketplace, and I remain cynical about it only because people just don't like putting things on their head in the mass market or over their eyes. But the industry seems to have a renewed interest in the AR, VR area and from major companies other than Meta.
Right. And we're going to get into that in a few seconds when we talk about some of the Metaverse stuff. Is it going to be a real deal finally in 2023? And we'll follow up on the Apple stuff. And actually, that's probably a good pivot point. Why don't we get into the the Apple stuff right off the bat here? Stuart, you kind of said it. I'm going to probably make a few comments and then turn it over to you. 2023 is already kind of an interesting year for Apple because they've delayed some product launches that they haven't refreshed their MacBook Pro notebooks with their new Apple M2 Silicon yet. There's rumors that the performance has not been up to snuff. It's marginally faster. Don't know if that's true yet. Got to see if that. But apparently they have the issues with that. Their silicon is forced to delay the introduction of these new notebooks. There are rumors that they are going to finally get into the AR, VR glasses space. My personal view is that the industry needs that, simply because Apple will legitimize that space. I think they're going to find the right usage model. That, hey, these glasses might be $2,500 or $3,000, and but at the end of the day, and this is only my conjecture, but I think Apple will go after some type of mainstream usage model, probably some type of AR, VR version of FaceTime, because everybody does FaceTime. And I think you would get a lot of families that says, you know what, if I could put these things on my head in the privacy of my home and have a virtual FaceTime call with a family member across the country, and if it's done in a non amateur hour type of way, I think they may have something there. But I think the industry needs Apple to do something, because to your point, Stewart, there's just a lot of people playing, a lot more renewed interest, but still it's a very niche space.
Well, like I said, historically speaking, the one technology that has never seemed to really take hold in the mass media is personal eyewear. This has been going on since 3D in the 1920s. People just don't like putting glasses or something that covers their eyes. It just historically, there have been 3 attempts at 3D, and that's in the movie theater where you can only wear them for 2 hours. Right. So I think you're right that Apple might be the one company. I will remain cynical. There's just a century of history where people just don't want to put stuff on their eyes. I don't know what it is, and I've tried to do some research on this from a psychological point of view and haven't come up with anything, but it's hard to fight with history on this, in that every time there's been over the years, all these personal theaters. Epson has been pushing it for a long, long time. It has just never taken hold in the mass market. It just hasn't. If Apple manages to do it, excellent work. Glad to see it. I think the virtual presence, virtual tourism, I don't think an advanced version of FaceTime is going to do it. I think virtual travel and those sorts of things would be, quote unquote, a killer app, especially for the mass market, because you'll have a lot of the baby boomers who, like myself, don't get out as much as they'd like to or used to. That could be a compelling usage case. But they're going to have to prove to me that the mass market wants to essentially blind themselves for even a brief period of time. It's just something that history has not borne out for a usage case model. Yeah. So on the other thing, on the Apple side, they've lost $1 trillion in value over the last year, and a lot of that was because of all these production problems that they're having in China with the iPhone. So I think all of this effort is the VR effort, the talk of a touchscreen finally coming to MacBook. I think all of these are meant to, I don't want to say distract necessarily from the iPhone issues as far as investors are concerned, but to diversify not only their product mix, which they've really haven't been successful at over the last decade, that the iPhone has dominated half of their revenues, but also to help speed up the diversification of their supply chain, which is going to take a decade or more. So I think Apple is going to be throwing a lot more things at the wall in an attempt to regain some of that market value, regain some of their momentum. I don't know if you noticed just today, Tim Cook's compensation got cut by 40% because of the trouble that the company has been having lately.
My heart breaks.
Yeah, my heart bleeds for him. Yeah, I understand. But I think a lot of the rumors that we are hearing of the AirPods Lite, a new, less expensive HomePod, I think a lot of these are an attempt by Apple to diversify away from the problems that they've been having with iPhone production. And so I think that's why we're going to get AR earlier than they were talking about 2025 for this AR VR thing for Apple. Yeah.
But Rob, I want to pull Rob into this, is that I want to get his thoughts on where he thinks Apple's going this year. But the truth of the matter is that even putting the supply chain issues aside, the smartphone category, especially high-end category, it's slowing down. Yep. I mean, it's not a high-growth market. It's growing at a single-digit percentile.
Not growing at all.
And the fact of the matter is that you wrap
saturation.
Yep.
Well, you wrap supply chain issues around that, makes the situation even worse. And everything you just talked about, Stuart, with the exception of the AR, VR stuff, it's all rinse and repeat. New AirPods, they haven't refreshed the AirPod Maxes in 2 years. Maybe they do that, but that's not going to move the needle in a big way. So, Rob, what's your take, and where do you think Apple's going? You think it's more rinse and repeat, or do you think they finally do something a bit? And we haven't even talked about Apple Car yet. That's another.
Let's first start with the Apple AR VR, still vaporous headset. Apple has convinced people to wear computers on one part of their body, their wrist, not on their head. And if it's really the last numbers I'd seen from Mark Gurman at Bloomberg were like $2,000. Most people will not buy anything for video chats that cost $2,000, much less something that they have to strap to their head. Even if it's $1,000, that kind of makes it a niche product. I mean, people like video calls, but that didn't get people to buy like Facebook portals or any of these other more specialized things to do that when you already have, your tablet, your phone, everything else. I think what Apple should be doing, they really need to be less dependent on China. That should be just a strategic imperative. They are really heavily leveraged on that country. It's not a good situation for them long term, but also they need to have devices made in larger numbers than pretty much any other electronics company on earth. So I also hope they will just stick to their knitting. They keep having this problem where they update a product category and then it goes stale for like 2 years. The Mac Mini on my desk, I'm glad I bought it 2 years ago because there hasn't been an upgraded model since then. The iPad Mini, that's now about a year old, no change to that. And they clearly have the money to do it. Maybe fewer stock buybacks. And on a personal note, can Apple please, now they're getting rid of Lightning, make a mouse that you can charge via USB-C and charge while you still use it? That's what I think people would really like.
Right.
Rob, I agree with you. I mean, the one thing about, even before Apple Silicon, and you and I have talked about this many, many times before, Apple even was not even a fast follower with revving to new Intel processors when the Windows guys instantaneously would okay, there's a new round of Intel Core 9 processors, we're going to put them in our product line. You never would see that with Apple. Apple had its own kind of march to their own drum type of thing, and I think, by the way, that's a bit cynical, right? Now, of course, they're highly dependent on Apple Silicon, and if that's not going well, that's just going to impact.
Nobody else to blame.
Right.
That's going to release their product cadence. John, what are your thoughts?
Well, there are a couple of things. One is, I've said that's for a long time. Smartphones are a legacy product. There's been no development and improvement in a smartphone for several years, and there aren't any on the horizon. Right? There's nothing that's really going to revolutionize that little rectangular piece of glass and plastic in our hands. So Stuart's right. You got to be looking for some other product, some other thing that is going to take you forward, and they haven't come up with it yet. Neither is anybody else. So, I mean, it's not just a problem with Apple. The problem with the VR thing goes all the way back to, would have been the 90s with Sony's VR headset. And I remember playing a game called Descent. Oh. And so the issue they had with these VR headsets was something they called cyber sickness. And that's pretty much the problem still with every single model. It's so disorienting to wear one of those things, even if it sort of seems cool. And that's why people don't like it, because it does have this like head spinning effect after you've worn it for a while for everybody. That's one issue, and the other issue is 3 words: resolution, resolution, and resolution, right? They all suck. They look terrible. It's what nobody wants to say it, but when you look at this virtual reality, it's like all pixelated and not, even at 1080p is not good enough. It needs to be much higher resolution. Right. So, until those things happen.
Headset that had great resolution, a Finnish company called Varjo. And it was really impressive to sort of sit down in this virtual Aston Martin, and it seemed so realistic. I was puzzled to see my hand sort of disappear into the seat as if it were a piece of water. But that's also a $7,000 headset. They don't even sell it to consumers. Their market is actual car companies, people running flight sims.
Right, and you need that kind of processing power and everything to do it on the back end of it. So you're hanging off a big system anyway.
To a computer, yeah, tethered to it.
Right, yeah. So you can't do. I mean, you can technically do it, but to get it into a pair of glasses. Now, there was an Israeli company that was showing their glasses off-site that looked actually pretty good, and say they have a deal with some major OEMs. And that deal may be, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, with Apple, and that may be their glasses, and they're very small, and they look, like a regular, 50s heavy frame pair of glasses. But so that may be possible. But this whole perception and disorienting feeling of wearing these things is a serious problem that you're going to encounter no matter what you do.
It may take until quantum computing becomes portable, essentially, to get to the processing level that you need to not only process the high resolution that you need, but also not only the high resolution, but the 360-degree view. A lot of this VR stuff is really limited to about 140, 160 degrees, which means once you start turning around you, especially for live things like the NBA, once you start turning your head, there simply is not enough processing to fill all that space with 8K or whatever the resolution necessary is to give you that persistence of vision that is really required to make you feel as if you're in another world.
Right. And there's the motion thing. There is one company, that company I mentioned, HoloRide, which they track the motion of the car so that when you're moving around looking at something stationary, it tracks with the motion of the car. So it basically is trying to blend in with your environment so you don't feel sick and you don't get that kind of thing happening.
Right.
More techniques like that to make it seem more normal, to make it seem like a really immersive experience will help. But yeah, I'm with you, Stuart. I'm pretty cynical about this happening anytime soon. If I was a company, I wouldn't be investing any money in the Metaverse right now. Maybe 3-4 years from now, but not today.
Well, let's talk about it in the few minutes we have left here. Let's talk about. I think we've addressed a lot of this so far, but
here's my answer.
It's 2000.
Yeah, the answer is no.
Again, I would just, I would preface this saying that there has to be a killer app. I agree with everything everybody said in terms of, Rob, you said, hey, listen, at a certain point, no matter how magical technology is, if it's $2,000 or $3,000, most of the world can't afford it. I mean, price elasticity is a real thing. However, if there's a company that can somehow run, can somehow defy gravity, which Apple could do. I mean, they do that in smartphones. I mean, if you look at their market share in the price bands they play at the high end, they do quite well. So if they do come out with some type of compelling application, and I still maintain it will some really cool version of FaceTime, maybe I'm wrong, I think that could move the needle. Do I think that they would sell 100 million of them? Probably no. And that's, by the way, that's how I define mainstream. I don't define mainstream as a couple of million units. Mainstream to me is it a 300-400 million unit market? I just think that it's got to all the points that all of you guys made, got a long way to go. Now I would differentiate it though, by the way, between glasses, which if the glasses have a very narrow use case, like for conference calls and really good sounding music that you could wear, and you could design them in such a way that that some people, it may not look like you're wearing smart glasses. Those are really not AR, VR glasses, but they're smart. Yeah, there might be some opportunity there. But in terms of any time you have to wear gear where you have to go out in public, I think it's a hard sell. It's a hard sell. Stuart, go ahead. Why don't you chime in?
Well, again, I think all the things that we have said so far all play into 2023 not being the year that this goes mainstream. Even if the killer app, I don't think, is interpersonal communications. I just don't. There were several TV makers, for instance, this year that introduced. Samsung and LG now both have big screen TV with cameras, telehealth systems. You don't need a helmet for this. So interpersonal communications, I don't think, is the killer app. I think that virtual presence is probably much more of a killer app, because if you're going to go mainstream, you have to get all segments of population, and the one set of population that is going to be the most difficult to get to, which is typically the most difficult to get to, is the senior population. person. And if you did a virtual presence thing, if you could put, grandma at somebody's wedding that they can't physically get to, that's compelling.
Yes.
And so I think virtual presence is probably much more of a compelling application than interpersonal communications. There are plenty of ways to interpersonal video people. I can't tell you how many Zoom calls I'm on, by the way, where people don't even turn on their cameras.
Yes.
So I think this whole idea that you'll put on a helmet to enhance your business meetings is, I don't think that. I think it's got to be something other than interpersonal communications.
And I'll jump in, sir. I think there's a correlation between the earlier in the day that you have a Zoom call, the higher the chances of someone not having their camera turned on. Especially, if when you're on the West Coast and some person schedules a call at 8 o'clock in the morning, East Coast time. Do I really want to put the camera on at 5 o'clock in the morning? But
I'm a tech guy. I don't care what I look like. I don't care. Hey, look, I'm growing to the David Letterman Memorial Beard here. I don't care. Yeah, I just like using the technology.
Kind of look like Letterman, and I know you have his kind of money. The question I have for you, Rob, is the virtual presence usage model that Stewart highlighted is a very interesting one, and I know that deep down. You don't want to have to buy season tickets for the Nationals because you want to have a virtual subscription. So you can say, you know what, I'm paying this. I don't need to leave my house. I can pretend as if I'm at the ballpark. I do want to leave
my house, actually.
So is there a killer usage model, Rob?
I'm still kind of struggling. I think augmented reality has a future, but on the devices we already have, you can hold this thing up. This camera gives you a view on the screen of what's around you, and you can overlay information on it, like the Flight Radar 24 app. If you want to see when Elon's jet is going to be in the sky, where it is, it'll show you flights in the sky. Tap on it, you can see the tail number, the flight number, whatever. That's neat. That's already around. That technology has been in use for over a decade. It's just not every application calls for that. In terms of dedicated headwear, I've grown more skeptical of this category. And full-on VR, this is the reason Facebook stock has lost so much of its value, because I think the market has decided this is not a good direction for the company to go in.
I think Meta stock is going in real time based on Rob's body language.
Driving it down a little further.
Right.
John, just to close this out, because we only have a couple minutes left. What are your remaining thoughts?
I'm laughing because there is the killer app, right? This is a family show, but there is a killer app for this. When we were in Las Vegas,
right?
When we were in Las Vegas,
that application of which you speak has been done at previous CESs. I didn't see that being done at this one.
They've tried this before, but the AVN.
You were not at the right show. You were not at the right show, Rob.
Right.
They still do. They still do the adult video awards ceremony, which apparently was happening in Las Vegas when we were there. But it was so low key. I was in the hotel where the awards were being given. I didn't even realize it. It was like, oh, really?
You should look up from your phone more often, man.
That adult marketplace, has always been touted for, maybe it could launch a new technology like it did VCRs, for example, is the thing that people pull out as an example. But again, it's really not even good enough for that. So, I don't think this is the era for it. But I also have, years ago, I did a Popular Science story where I wore one of these headsets all day long in New York City. I was attached to a huge computer that was like hanging off my back. But the augmented reality aspect in a pair of glasses that I have to wear anyway, that's something that small. I think those Google Glasses were not too far off the mark. If they just had the right thing, if I looked at the Empire State Building and it said, that's the Empire State Building built in blah, 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 in the corner of the glasses if I wanted, I think that application could work, if it's not too expensive. But again, not this year, we don't see that technology yet.
Right. One thing I think we need to mention here is that we're talking about consumer applications.
Right.
The consumer products market is all in on AR, and they're all making very large investments. A lot of these big, the Procter & Gamble's of the world are making very large investments in this for virtual shopping. for being able to use your phone and see what you look like wearing certain things. You already see a lot of this in the eyeglass market, but a lot of these packaged goods companies for e-commerce applications and even in-store shopping for shopping purposes is where I think you're going to get a lot of AR applications moving forward, and that may be a Trojan horse to get this technology into the consumer mindset. So I think the consumer products market for e-selling and having augmented reality for selling purposes, for sizing, see what I look like in this dress, see what this piece of furniture looks like in my house, you're going to see a lot more of this going forward as a way of perhaps introducing the consumer to some of these technologies.
Yeah, does this?
Well, guys, we're going to have to wrap it up there because we are now. As much as I'd like to continue this dialogue, and I have a feeling that we'll be talking about VR, AR again, at least once during our podcast for the year. But listen, guys, thanks for taking the time and joining me for today's podcast. For our viewing and listening audience, please make the Smart Tech Check podcast part of your day or commute. Please make sure that you hit the like and subscribe buttons at the end of today's podcast. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Mark Vina Tech Guy. And until next time, have a great week and talk to you guys soon.